dear friends and colleagues. Welcome to our third session of our conference, which has a wonderful title, Being Young. Sounds like a dream come true for many people. But we have two very exciting and very competent speakers in this session, Viorel, Coman and František Štech, who will be speaking on the topic of this session, each from their own little bit different perspective. The first speaker is Viorel Coman. He's a theologian based in Leuven, where he's a senior post-doctoral fellow at a Catholic university there. Also, he's a secretary of Societas Ecumenicas, and he has a book out, published with Fortress Press, on Trinitarian ecclesiology of Dumitru Staniloi. Viorel will be speaking on the theological impact of youth movements on 20th century theology. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin my presentation, allow me to express my deep gratitude to the organizers of this conference for the invitation to participate in this academic event and to present a paper on youth movements and their impact on theology. I'm really excited to be part of this academic event, as this is one of the first conferences I attend in person after so many months of isolation and limited contacts due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the joy of attending this conference is double. I'm also thankful to all the participants in this academic event for offering me the opportunity to learn and from their excellent presentations. In our conference schedule, the title of my presentation is The Theological Impact of the Youth Movements in the 20th Century Theology. To cover all 20th century Christian youth movements and their theological impact, it's a bit too ambitious for a presentation like this. For this reason, I will narrow down a bit the subject of my presentation to the impact of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, upon 20th century Russian Orthodox theology. The article that I will send for publication in the proceedings of this conference will be more faithful to the title announced in the conference schedule, as it will also look at the impact of other various youth movements, both in and on Orthodoxy. Syndesmos in Greece, Le Mouvement de la Jeunesse Orthodoxe in the Patriarchate of Antioch, and the Christian Student Associations in Romania, to name just a few of them. I will start my presentation by introducing briefly the YMCA and its work among Russians at the turn of the century. I will then focus on its contribution to the preservation, enrichment, and expansion of Russian Orthodox faith and culture, especially through its support of the émigré student movements, the so-called Russian student Christian movement, the Saint-Serge Theological Institute in Paris, and the publishing house that offered religious literature for the Russian émigré community. What my presentation intends to show is that the interaction of the YMCA with Russian Orthodox Christianity is the story of a collaboration that helped Russian Orthodoxy and its theology survive and accomplish its mission in Western Europe after the Bolshevik Revolution. So the YMCA in Russia. The Young Men's Christian Association was founded in 1844 in London and grew rapidly to become a worldwide movement with the aim of promoting evangelical Christianity among the city's young men. Initially, the association included only Protestants, but as the movement spread, it attracted men from various denominations, avoiding controversial theological discussions. Its main goal was the improvement of the spiritual, mental, social, and physical condition of young men through philanthropic work, sport, lectures for a variety of skills, conferences, schools for biblical study, and other events. A defining characteristic of the movement was the call on men to turn to Christ and live a life of heroism and virility, the so-called practice of muscular Christianity, with its emphasis on character formation through a strong work ethics or discipline. The YMCA first appeared in Russia in the last decade of the 19th century under the direct involvement of the American wing of the YMCA. Its work focused on different categories of young people: workers, students and professors, prisoners of war, especially during the First World War, Allied soldiers, young men in the capital of Russia, and the emigre community, especially after 1920s. Even though during the pre-revolution period, the YMCA received the moral and financial support of state authorities, the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church were not particularly enthusiastic about it, and the movement was very often accused of proselytism. When it comes to the YMCA relation to the Russian Orthodox Church, it moved from practical support in the early years to limited support just before the Bolshevik Revolution, and finally to enthusiastic support in the emigration. The Russian student Christian movement. It is under the leadership of the YMCA that the Russian student Christian movement was founded in Russia in 1899 to respond to the moral and spiritual needs of university students who have been alienated from the church due to its close connection with the autocratic regime. A large majority of the students were experiencing a time of political ferment, and many of them rejected the influence of clergy, subscribing instead to socialist political views and materialistic philosophies. Even though initially the Russian student Christian movement included only a small number of local people, it spread immediately to the universities of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Kiev, working towards three main goals. The first one, to find among students of all institutions of higher education those who sympathize with the spread of the gospel in the student environment. The second one was to unite believing students for their own spiritual strengthening and for the struggle with unbelief among their colleagues. And third, to spread a Christian message in student centers in a non-confessional spirit. As expected, conflicts among the members of the movement erupted quite often, especially because they had different visions for the movement. While some of them believed that the Orthodox Church should be central to the movement and that the movement should be more Russian than Western, others considered just the opposite and opted for a non-confessional approach. Important figures of the Russian Orthodox intelligentsia with social sensibilities, especially Sergius Bulgakov and Nikolai Berdyaev, were invited to give lectures to the members of the movement. As the leaders of the Russian student Christian movement were of the opinion that it is possible to win university students back to Christianity and the church without forcing them to abandon the social and political concerns that drove them away in the first place. With the tragic outbreak of the First World War, the activities of the movement ceased in many Russian cities, while in Moscow and Kiev they continued at a very limited level. With the Bolshevik Revolution and the installation of the communist regime, it was difficult for the Russian student Christian movement to carry on its work in the Soviet Union, as it was declared illegal under Stalin, and some of its members were arrested, others forced to leave the country. Nevertheless, Bible study groups continued their work in secrecy. From the beginning, the Russian student Christian movement attracted the participation of Orthodox students, but the movement did not function with any support from the church leaders, with some exceptions. However, after the Bolshevik Revolution, the most solid work of the movement was carried out in the emigre communities in Western Europe, Russia abroad. Mother Maria Skoptsova and its philanthropic work became central to the Russian student Christian movement. The transition from Russia to Russia abroad brought an important twist in the agenda of the Russian student Christian movement. Whereas after 1917, the Russian student Christian movement participated in key developments in Russian education, religion, and philanthropy, with no central focus on Russian Orthodoxy. After the October Revolution and the flourishing of the movement in the Russian diaspora, the preservation and expansion of the Russian Orthodox faith and culture among the emigre communities became the central goal of the Russian student Christian movement and YMCA. St. Sergius Theological Institute and the publishing activities of the movement bear witness to such a support for Russian Orthodoxy, which made a huge impact upon the development of Orthodox theology in the 20th century. So St. Sergius Theological Institute, the first institution supported by the movement. by the movements, in fact. Even though the St. Sergius Orthodox Institute was established only in 1925, Metropolitan Evlogi approached the leaders of the YMCA and Russian student Christian movement as early as 1921 to see whether they will support the creation of a theological institute for Russian Orthodox pastoral training. In the summer of 1924, when the Metropolitan approached John Mott, the leader of the YMCA, to request assistance from YMCA and the Russian student Christian movement in purchasing a German Lutheran church building in Paris to be used as a seminary building. The association provided the Metropolitan with no less than $5,000 so that he can buy the property and organize the institute. The financial assistance from YMCA and Russian student Christian movement for the institute continued over the years, contributing to the establishment and development of one of the most important and influential Orthodox academic institutions of the 20th century, which was the working place of outstanding Russian Orthodox theologians such as Sergius Bulgakov, George Florovsky, and Nicholas Afanasiev, as well as the training place of other giants of contemporary Orthodoxy, such as Alexander Zhmeman, John Meyendorff, Boris Bobrinskoy, and others. If we take into account that St. Sergius Institute made a great contribution to the formation of St. Vladimir's Theological Institute in New York, the other major Orthodox academic center in 20th century, then we can see the proportions of the impact of the YMCA and Russian student Christian movement upon 20th century Orthodoxy and its theology. It is no exaggeration to say that the help of the YMCA and the Russian student Christian movement allowed the St. Sergius Theological Institute to become a distinguished academic institution that first trained many young priests to serve emigrant communities, second, created a vital place that allowed Russian emigrant theologians and young intellectuals to survive in a foreign country and continue their academic work, which changed the face and trajectory of modern Orthodoxy. And third, to develop a strong network of global Christian relations that made Orthodoxy known beyond the borders of Eastern Christianity. I should probably mention that the professors of the St. Sergius Institute and the members of the Russian student Christian movement were actively involved in the dialogue with the Anglicans, with whom they founded the Fellowship of St. Sergius and St. Alban in the UK, working for the deeper understanding and close cooperation between the two Christian traditions. The YMCA Publishing House, so the second institute supported by the YMCA. So the YMCA Press served as the most prominent element of the association service to the Orthodox community, both inside and outside Russia. During the period before the Bolshevik Revolution, the YMCA Press published mostly practical textbooks and Protestant writings for the Russian audience. After 1920 and the expansion of the emigrant community, the efforts of the YMCA Press turned towards Russian Orthodox literature and theology. In this way, the publishing house became a vehicle for Russian Orthodox faith and culture, addressing the spiritual, theological, and intellectual needs of the Russian emigrant community in Europe. Given the fact that the Soviet government placed severe restrictions on the production of religious books and periodicals within the USSR, some of the publications of the YMCA Press were secretly and illegally distributed in Soviet Russia, serving equally the Orthodox community in the Soviet Union. In addition to the more popular spiritual writings, such as the historical biography of different saints, Russian saints, the YMCA Press produced works in Orthodox religious philosophy and theology. Nikolai Berdyaev became the leading Russian participant in the YMCA Press. With generous funding from the YMCA, the journal Put the Way, which became a platform for the exchange of religious, philosophical, and literary ideas within the immigrant community, became part of the YMCA Press program. In addition, Berdyaev and Bulgakov were the two chief authors whose books started being published by the YMCA Press. In so doing, the YMCA Press rendered a huge service not only to the Russian Orthodox community, but to the entire Orthodoxy. Very often the YMCA Press took care of the translation of the works of Bulgakov and Berdyaev, for example, into other languages of international relevance, such as French, English, and German. For example, in 1959, the works of Bargár were translated into 14 languages with the support of the YMCA. It is also important to mention the fact that after the Second World War, the press published the complete works of Dostoevsky, which were no longer available in the Soviet Union at the time. In 1967, the YMCA Press was the first publisher in the West to reprint Mikhail Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. In 1970s, it published the full-length Russian version of Solzhenitsyn's Cancer Word. And in 1973, the YMCA Press published for the first time Solzhenitsyn Archipelago Gulag. These are some of the most important and well-known publications by the YMCA Press. Due to the fact that some American members of the YMCA did not share an appreciation for the Russian religious approach of the press, Paul Anderson, a top leader of the international YMCA, transferred the ownership of the press to the Russian student Christian movement in 1950s. In 1990, the press was able to return to Russia and open libraries in Moscow, Petersburg, Kiev, and other Russian cities. In 1990, Nikita Struve, the director of the press, stressed the important role played by the YMCA press in the life of Russian Orthodoxy by saying that, I quote, "For many years, almost 70 years, the publisher YMCA press stood almost alone in saving Russian culture in general and Russian Orthodox theological and church culture in particular." Some conclusions. In my short presentation, I offer a general overview of the impact of the YMCA on Russian Orthodoxy via the Russian Student Christian Movement, St. Sergius Theological Institute, and the press. Two main conclusions are worth mentioning. First, it is without any doubt that the educational, social, philanthropic, civic, and religious work of the YMCA in Russia was a catalyst for the revival of religious and spiritual practices among the young generation of Russian students, very much attracted by the materialistic philosophy of the 19th century. However, the most important contribution that YMCA made to Russian Orthodoxy and to Orthodoxy in general was to support its survival and consolidation in Western Europe and to expand its influence beyond the borders of Russian Orthodoxy. Both St. Serge Institute and the publications of the YMCA Press were primarily meant for the Russian emigre communities, but over time their influence extended far beyond the Russian community to promote the Orthodox faith and it reaches to a much larger audience. In his most recent book, called Looking East in Winter, Contemporary Thought and the Eastern Christian Tradition, Rowan Williams writes that over the past century, I quote, Western theology has become conspicuously aware of the intellectual seriousness of its counterpart in the Eastern Christian world. From being a slightly exotic subject in academic eyes, linked with issues to do with spirituality or with the less frequented byways of patristics, the latter has increasingly been recognized as a credible and significant partner of conversation, informing a response to a number of contemporary issues. End of quotation. If Orthodoxy is no longer perceived today by Catholics and Protestants as the foreign and exotic Christian other, but as a serious partner of conversation that can enrich Western theology, this is also largely due to the work of the YMCA in the service of the Russian Orthodox immigrant community via the institutions I mentioned in my presentation. And a second short conclusion, Orthodox theology has benefited a lot from his encounter with Roman Catholic theology in the 20th century, especially from his interaction with the representatives of French Catholic ressourcement in Paris. Nevertheless, what my presentation has shown is that the contribution of the Protestant world to the preservation and expansion and enrichment of 20th century Orthodox theology is of no less importance. The work of the Young Men's Christian Association is but an example, a meaningful one in this regard. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Viorel, for a very engaging presentation and also for keeping your time, so which gives us enough time for discussion, to which we turn now. Who has questions or comments, please? Tim.
Thank you very much, Viorel. Very enjoyable. I enjoyed it, and thank you. Very informative. I do have one maybe comment question. It's kind of yeah, you don't have time for everything, but it would be also true to say, wouldn't it, that the interaction with the YMCA from the Orthodox side I think in the kind of 30s, there were two reactions, I think. One was very positive and one was much more negative, and it was one of the, if I remember rightly, it was one of the reasons for kind of divisions within the Orthodox community in Paris. So would you like to say a bit about that?
Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, this critical interactions of Orthodox community with the YMCA happen not only in diaspora but even before in Russia. The same two reactions to the YMCA can be seen even in Russia before the revolution. On the one side, there were those, and I would say a large majority of Orthodox people, hierarchs and intellectuals as well, were criticizing the YMCA for proselytism, and they even make caricatures out of its work, saying that it is a Masonic institution trying to destroy Russian Orthodoxy. On the other hand, a small minority of hierarchs supported its activity, and I think the same happened in the diaspora. And in my paper, I addressed only the relationship between the YMCA and Russian Orthodoxy, but YMCA worked also in Romania, and for instance, at the beginning there was a decent collaboration between the Orthodox Church and the YMCA. But in the 1930s, for example, when the political situation moved towards the far right wing, the YMCA was almost forbidden in Romania because all these student associations turned to a very nationalistic agenda.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Olga?
Thank you, Viorel, for your very rich presentation. And whereas I was listening to you, I was thinking, just to come back on the level of the discussion about personal maturation, I was thinking about this really deep impact of the youth movements, especially in the immigration area and the Russian immigration. Especially, you mentioned the RSHD, the Christian movement, Christian action of the Russian students, from which came the renewal of the theology. And because this movement, when it was founded in 1926 it was in Czechoslovakia at that time.
Pešerov or
in Pešerov. When it was founded, the main idea was the ecclesialization of all the life. And from this, all the generation afterwards, especially in France, lived from this motto, and they really tried to incarnate this idea of all the life should be under the gaze of God. And I think maybe we have here an answer of the previous discussion about we need a personal moment of conversion to God, about infant baptism or adult baptism. And I think it's throughout these youth movements that we can find this gap between a faith that you received as a child in a passive way and a moment of you become active, and it's a personal faith. So yes, the youth movement are very, very important in that gap.
Thank you very much, Olga, for your comments. Indeed, I agree with you that we need a personal moment of conversion. Otherwise, baptism and all this initiation rites are without any relevance. At the end of the day, even Stalin was baptized. So what was the impact of that? But to come back to your remark on the ecclesiastic churchification of life, I think the YMCA collaborated very well with the representatives of the so-called Russian School of Religious Philosophy. The representative representatives of the other direction of the neo-patristic movement had, they were not opposed necessarily to this movement, but I mean the impact I think is less visible on their works. And because both Bulgakov, Berdyaev, and I can also include Mother Maria Skoptsova, I briefly mentioned her name here. I think she is the one who incarnated very well this philanthropic dimension of the Christian life. That the Church needs to leave the buildings and meet people on the streets, help people, and so on.
Thank you. And we still have time for one more question or comment. Aleš.
So I have no background in that, so I'm really, but I wondered because I thought that like Berdyaev, let's say, like wasn't a classical representative of what I would say like mainstream Orthodoxy at that time, and it seems to me that all the figures you mentioned like were really revolutionary in the Orthodox Christian thinking. So did it create some kind of like tangent gap between the world of the, let's say, Eastern thought and this like Western school? I would call it now the Western school. It's probably not called like that.
You mean
Orthodox
Berdyaev as a representative of this Western school?
Right.
Please continue if you want to say something. Thank you for your question. I've just mentioned in my previous response that in Russian Orthodox immigration, at the level of theology, we had two directions. Even though some people, claim that the distinction between the two directions, or it's not that important. The first one is the neo-patristic movement, which we can say it's a more conservative. I don't know whether the term does justice to the agenda of the movement. And the other one was more liberal, so to say, the Russian School of Religious Renaissance, represented by Bulgakov, of Berdyaev, even Mother Maria Skoptsova. But I indeed, Bulgakov, Berdyaev, and others were more revolutionary, collaborated very well, and they also included some, in their theology, in their reflections, ideas taken from the YMCA, the need of the Church to engage socially. But I think that also the representatives of the neo-patristic movement benefited from the work of the YMCA, because Florovsky, who is the representative of the more conservative direction, the neo-patristic movement, was also professor at San Sergio's Institute, and he was also, together with Vladimir Losky, involved in the fellowship of San Sergius and St. Alban in the UK, which was also supported financially by the Russian student Christian movement. Yeah.
Our discussion with Viorel could continue, but unfortunately they will need to wait for more informal settings over lunch or over breaks. Now we thank you to Viorel once again.
Thank you very much.